What's the best example of the harm done to ordinary people by the revelations in the 11.5 million documents that you guys went through?
I think for me, one of the most striking examples of harm that can be done through shell companies is the fact that when we first started looking through the files, we came across the name of a company that had been alleged by the US Department of Treasury as having supplied oil and fuel to the government of Syria. And as we all know, Syria has been involved in a very deadly barrel bomb fueled war over many years. So the fact that this company, which allegedly had done these things, was allowed to have offshore companies and to continue using them was for me a pretty stark example of how those two worlds of victim and offshore coincide.
So how many people died in that activity?
Well, I think in the Syrian war we're talking about tens of thousands of victims, civilians who've died, let alone combatants. Of course, the company involved and the companies who we did try and reach out to have previously said that they didn't know what their fuel was being used for, but the fact is that the US Department of Treasury did put this company on notice, and yet it was able, at least shortly, at least for a short time, to continue doing its business through offshore.
Some of these activities are clearly illegal, some are unsavory, some seem perfectly legal. What's the percentage?
It's hard to say. With 11.5 million files and 220,000 offshore companies, it's hard to say. Certainly, the examples of illegality or even moral suspicion that we found are in the minority. And Mossack Fonseca, the company that incorporated these firms, told us very clearly that it's a respected company for whom nearly all of its clients act by the letter and the spirit of the law. I think the problem is with this offshore system that when you're creating hundreds of thousands of companies, even if a small percentage of those are using those companies to commit or facilitate corruption or bribery, let alone smuggle drugs or weapons across the world, then that alone in itself is, in the eyes of, I think, many advocates, reasons to scrutinise the offshore world and potentially to enact reforms.
Are more revelations coming, and when, and about what?
So I think as of 45 minutes ago at 2 p.m. today, ICIJ published more stories. Partners I know have got stories planned for the rest of the week. Some stories haven't even come out yet. We have partners in Botswana, for example, who are a weekly outfit, and so they'll be publishing shortly. I can't really say about what, given that the great thing about ICIJ is, although we work together as a team and we all agree to stick by a date of publication, a project title, and to work in kind of confidence, professional confidence about this data, everyone retains editorial independence. So ICIJ and no other media partner tells or controls another media partner what they can and can't report on. Ultimately, it's up to the public interest of the journalist outfit and the journalists themselves who are working on the project.
There have been previous corruption revelations in Russia, but not much seems to have changed. What could be done this time to follow through to see if some change would happen?
I think what could change, and what many experts have told us, is that laws in countries need to change. As Mossack Fonseca and others have told us in the industry, they work according to the laws of these nations, of Panama, of the British Virgin Islands, even of the United States, which has a very large offshore industry. Therefore, the problem is even, I think, according to many advocates, an issue of what is allowed by the laws of countries where these companies are created. Some of us might find it odious that a company can create an offshore company to avoid paying any tax when it's mining or drilling for oil in certain countries of Africa, but in many cases that's actually completely illegal.
What should Washington do in regard to Russia? Investigate or what?
It's interesting. America has an important role in the offshore world, not just because it's America and is the global policeman, but because when you think about it, and certainly what we've seen in the Panama Papers, is that monetary transactions go through US dollars, and we'll often at some point even touch a US-based financial institution or bank as that money is circling. I can't speak to the exact specifics of the Russian example, but we know, and we've spoken to experts who've said that the US may have the ability to take action and to act on certain things if transactions in US dollars or transactions that hit US correspondent banks involves any kind of illegal or unethical activity.
Turning to Cambodia, are you familiar with the case of the Cambodian Justice Minister Anvong Vathana? He apparently bought shares in a British Virgin Island company. Why is that a concern? People buy shares in companies all the time.
Sure, and it is important to say that that BVI companies in and of themselves are legitimate vehicles and many legitimate businesses and people use them. I think what is important and why this is a reason of public interest in investigation, not just in the Cambodia case but generally, is that international rules and national rules state that if you are what's called a politically exposed person, someone who is either a politician or is friends or family with a politician, then there are additional requirements that need to be gone through to make sure that you can legitimately have these businesses. In that particular case, there's no reason to doubt, from what I know of the files, that anything untoward has happened. The question is, I think, to what extent are politicians able, according to their own laws in which they live and work, able to do this?
Are there links between, well, the Justice Minister is fairly high-ranking. What are the links between him and other high-ranking members of the government there?
I couldn't speak to that, and I've no links to talk about.
In turning to China for a moment, what's new in the latest reports about Chinese leaders putting? Now, I believe your point was that they have huge amounts of money in offshore shell companies. Is that correct?
I'm not entirely over the China stories. What I can say is, because it's not news that friends and associates of senior Chinese politicians have had financial businesses outside China in the past. Again, it comes down to both the legality of that, whether or not Chinese law allows that, and I can't speak to that, but also whether or not the international system is one in which political figures and people related to politicians, whether or not there are sufficient controls on making sure that money that comes from people connected to politics is done in a transparent way and in a way that reflects and is in accordance with local laws.
A lot of these stories have been coming out for a while, and they're blocked in China. What can you do, what will you do to try to have more impact inside this country?
I'm not sure in this case what ICIJ will do. I know we've reported on some China examples currently. We previously did a project, a much smaller project that was called China Leaks, and we translated that into Mandarin, and that had, I think, some kind of higher profile purely because of the language, but it's a difficult one because I'm pretty sure that the current Panama Papers information isn't available from mainland China.
Did you get help from Chinese reporters?
I believe that we have worked with either certainly reporters who are familiar with Chinese and can speak with Mandarin and who can speak the language.
Not just Chinese speakers, but I mean people who are Chinese nationals. Did that happen?
I actually don't know about our partners who might be Chinese nationals.
Looking at the country of Georgia, can you tell us about the former Prime Minister of his Bidzina Ivanishvili's activities? What are the allegations? You cannot.
I can't, sorry.
Looking at the Balkans, what do the Panama Papers reveal about the business operations of Russian tycoons and corporations in the Balkans, in Serbia in particular?
No.
Okay. What about Bosnia?
No.
Albania?
No.
Okay. And what does your investigation tell us about the activities of Argentina's President Mauricio Macri? What about that?
From what I know of the Argentinian case, that's a situation in which he, as is well known, is a businessman who's had business activities for many years. I can't speak further on that. I know that our Argentinian partners have done a great job covering it, but I can't speak to it, sorry.
And in Bangladesh, there no. Okay.
Can't do Bangladesh either. Sorry.
All right. So what's the besides the impact of the on ordinary people of the fuel sales to Syria? There was another thing cited on your website about tax evasion or not paying taxes from an oil company in Uganda, and they were able to not pay taxes on amounting to something like $400 million. Can you describe that activity?
Sure. There are many examples that we see in Panama Papers in which either individuals from companies, and here I'm speaking broadly, not about the Uganda case, in which many companies set up complicated offshore structures. That's very common in the oil and gas field and industry, and it's often necessary for financing. But what's amazing about Panama Papers is that in a number of cases, we see specific requests by certain individuals and companies to create an offshore company with the specific intention of paying less tax than they would if they did not have that offshore company, and that's a concern. We also see documents in Panama Papers from governments who have written to these companies to say, we believe that the only reason you created this offshore company was to avoid our national taxes on oil, gas, or minerals. So it's, given the importance of natural resources to many economies across Africa, it's a really big issue, and I think that's one that journalists in Panama Papers will continue to investigate as time goes on.
Thanks very much.